But there are tons and tons of scary monsters there.
Resident Evil Retrospective.
You can judge the strength of a game series not only by the number of A-list products it produces, but the quality of its spin-offs as well. In the 13 years since Umbrella's research went public in the worst way, there have been 11 Resident Evil games published by Capcom that do not necessarily pertain to the main storyline. Their function was to provide new methods of undead disposal to sate the genre's increasing fanbase. The only handheld Resident Evil aside from the 2006 DS remake was released for the Game Boy Color. After the botched attempt to bring the original game to the same platform in 1999, Capcom commissioned the now defunct M4 Limited to develop a survival horror game from both a top-down and first-person perspective. Resident Evil Gaiden first launched in the UK on December 14, 2001.
Resident Evil.
Gaiden is the only RE title outside of a mod or a minigame to feature Barry Burton as a playable main character. Leon Kennedy also made an 8-bit appearance, but Barry led the campaign. Leaving Stars and working for an anti-Umbrella initiative, Leon boarded the ocean liner Starlight to investigate reports of a new bioorganic weapon, and when Kennedy went MIA, Burton was sent in to pick up the pieces. What he found was a mysterious girl named Lucia and a new sculpt of Tyrant. With an aerial view of each room, Barry and eventually Leon could scan approaching threats from all directions. The B button drew each weapon and their crosshair, and if the undead were targeted or got too close, the game switched to a form of first person. A golf swing meter darted back and forth, and target zones inflicted damage depending on the monster's distance. Gaiden was struck down by low review scores. It wasn't much for scares, and the story was far from the source. But then again, RE is not an experience that lends itself easily to portable play. Despite the fact that its constantly stranded heroes never had one, Resident Evil has spread all over cell phones since 2005. The first mobile Biohazard was called The Missions and featured Jill on home turf in Raccoon City. It had 100 stages to break up the survival requirements into digestible bits. Confidential Report was filed a year later. It introduced the forgettable characters Tyler Hamilton and Naomi McClane as they escaped a nondescript Umbrella lab in a school dormitory. Genesis in 2008 focused more on searching and puzzle solving, taking Jill even further back into the Spencer Mansion. That same year, Engage Mobile produced a port of the recently released Degeneration on DVD, with Leon Kennedy playing out events from the feature film. Resident Evil 4 was also in development for mobile phones in Japan and was shown at Tokyo Game Show in 2007, but details of its release never surfaced. Mobile Resident Evil raised questions as to what was essential in reproducing the look and feel of the series on a smaller scale. The music and atmosphere would have to take a back seat. Fans liked the puzzles, and brain teasers work well on the go, so those became more prominent. But whether you're playing on a set of numbers, a D-pad, or an analog stick, there's always someone to register a complaint about the aiming. Pistols hit their targets, but there was never a way to manually guarantee the headshot. Capcom Production Studio 2 tried to rectify this shortly after RE3 was finished. They chose a brand new setting and character for the debut Resident Evil first-person shooter, Gun Survivor. The Namco GunCon was compatible with the European and Japanese versions, but not in the US. It was released in Japan on January 27, 2000, a week before Code Veronica. In the US, it was just called Survivor. The game's protagonist had recently walked away from a helicopter crash, but left his memory behind. Trapped on Sheena Island, home of yet another Umbrella monster factory, he incorrectly assumed he was Vincent Goldman, the base's commander and the man responsible for the current surplus of zombies. A mercenary force called the Umbrella Trash Sweepers, a tyrant copy called the Hypnos T-Type, and most of the enemy gallery from Resident Evil 2 stood between the stranger and his identity. All he needed was a pistol and a lot of patience.
I may have been a bad person, but that was before. That's not who I am now. I will save these 2 kids. I swear it.
Survivor is the worst reviewed Resident Evil game ever made, and here's why. You couldn't strafe, look up or down, reload outside of switching back and forth to the inventory, or fire faster than the seemingly jammed guns would let you. The series had done a good job at disguising the crude-looking enemies by keeping them at a distance, but here you could see them up close and personal, and they looked especially nasty and pixelated. The game did offer multiple paths, continues, and unlimited bullets for your pistol, but broken English and a cast of unknowns kept the experience from resonating. Survivor 2 was originally supposed to be called Resident Evil Fire Zone, but it was later decided to tie the second zombie shooter with the first. The game was a rerun of Code Veronica, with Claire and Steve as the gun wielders, and specific arcade machines supported 2 players. The updated Survivor was an improvement, but not a tremendous stretch on Capcom's part, given the game it was based on already granted the same perspective. Nemesis made an unexpected appearance to keep the marksman on the move, which is the perfect indication that Survivor 2 strayed far away from Code Veronica's storyline. The last Survivor dropped the series moniker and was simply called Dead Aim. The plot is surprisingly considered canon, arming brand new characters Bruce McGivern and Fong Ling and guiding them through the cruise ship Spencer Rain. Former Arklay research scientist Morpheus Duval had taken the rap for the Raccoon City incident, and in an act of revenge, recreated the event he was wrongfully accused of in the first place, out on the open sea. Dead Aim snapped back and forth between first and third person, giving the gunplay a unique feel. Strafing was still missing, but players could at least evade if necessary, and light gun support was finally added in the States. Reviewers labeled Dead Aim as the best gun survivor, which, while not saying much, proved that the concept at least had potential. It came out in February of 2003, following the 2002 release of the third Survivor game, a prehistoric romp based on the Dino Crisis series called Dino Stalker. After Dead Aim, the Survivor line bled out and died. While RE fans didn't want Gun Survivor 5, they did enjoy locking their crosshairs upon rows and rows of the undead. The already convoluted storyline had twisted through multiple games, and the conceptually immersive viewpoint had been experimented with in major plot-revealing entries in the franchise. Capcom then considered that gamers might enjoy seeing the classics through the eyes of the heroes that lived them, while simultaneously skipping across historic moments at an accelerated pace. Nintendo's wireless Wii controller opened up a whole new catalog of light gun possibilities, and with the rush of arcade gun ports came Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles on November 13, 2007. Chronicles was split into 4 chapters, 3 of which were directly tied to prior RE releases. Chapter 1 started the story at the training facility from RE0. Chapter 2 painted the Spencer mansion from RE1 with bullet holes. Chapter 3 followed Jill and Carlos through areas unseen in RE3. And Chapter 4 revealed a final operation by STARS to destroy Umbrella's ultimate stronghold in Russia. Side missions opened up along the way, mostly following Wesker as he took his invisible footsteps around the major events from the timeline. The on-rail shooter sold more than 1 million copies, and the relative ease of the gameplay was attributed to its success. It felt like Resident Evil the ride, and not only were its hallowed horrors the source of many nostalgic moments, but a wealth of hidden case files clarified a lot of the holes left in the overarching narrative. Despite the fact that RE2 and 4 were both MIA, and the scenes from RE3 were mostly from the Outbreak series, most fans had a blast with it. Any good survivalist knows you have to shoot a zombie in the head, and the 4 Resident Evil FPS titles were built with this creed in mind. Capcom may have missed the mark on the production value of its early attempts, but they offered different experiences to say the least. With crosshairs enabled, the only thing a real gunslinger could ask for was another pair of hands on a second weapon, and if possible, a third, and a fourth. No Resident Evil game ever ended with just a single survivor. The heroes have always had to act as a team, and Capcom turned this ideal into the only other franchise spin-off that began development in 2002 called Biohazard Online.
Oh god, they're getting closer. We gotta go, now!
As you can see, there are too many roadblocks. I'm afraid you'll have to get out and continue on foot.
The project reached the PlayStation 2 on December 11, 2003 in Japan as Biohazard Outbreak. It highlighted a completely brand new cast of 8 central characters. A broadband connection and network adapter enabled up to 4 escapists to simultaneously struggle to get out of Raccoon City alive. Offline was available as well, with 2 AI bots assisting you. There were 5 separate scenarios, each offering a nostalgic slice of survival. The first mission started as just another evening in Jake's bar and ended with leveling several city blocks full of zombies. The second reimagined William Birkin's lab from RE2 with added ladders and crawl spaces. The third toured the hospital that Carlos would eventually demolish in RE3. The fourth trapped the players in a burning building, with the fifth and final campaign ending in a tyrant chase. The latest model was called Thanatos and was built by a renegade Umbrella researcher named Greg Mueller. Each humble hero had a place in the game. RPD officer Kevin Ryman had a 45 and superior aim, Mark Wilkins took less damage and was deadlier with blunt objects, David King was gifted with a knife and could repair broken weapons, Dr. George Hamilton could mix herbs into pill form, Jim Chapman could play dead and avoid the swarm, Yoko Suzuki had the biggest backpack, Alyssa Ashcroft was a master of unlocking, and Cheerful Cindy was the handy healer. No character was exclusive to any of the scenarios, so fans could choose their favorite for the duration. The theme of Outbreak's gameplay was obviously cooperation and teamwork. While there was no voice chat, the press of a button allowed the survivor to shout their current situation or desire, and specific characters or actions could be verbally selected. Items could be presented or requested from the inventory screen, depending on who was in close proximity. Injured comrades could be given an assisting shoulder, and the new bleed status would occur if a character received a critical strike, resulting in a temporary drop in health and movement speed. The objective structure was very similar to a walkthrough of any title in the main series, with the exception of the added virus gauge. As the seconds in each scenario ticked away, a percentage indicating your infection gradually rose towards 100%, which meant instant death. Contact with any type of evil gave the number a series of short boosts. Given that each scenario could take upwards of an hour, the gauge was a constant reminder not just to escape, but do it fast. Outbreak achieved satisfying sales, but only average reviews. Critiques were directed at its short length, unsatisfactory ad-lib communication system, and inconsistent AI. Players in Europe were especially displeased at the lack of online support, unlike other regions, despite the product being advertised as multiplayer ready. Those who did get connected could find special items and alternate paths that unlocked costumes and characters, removed ammo limits, or opened up more optional endings than any Resident Evil before it. But as long as Raccoon City still had a zip code, the online series would continue. Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 broke on September 9, 2004. The game's biggest addition to the series was the ability to move and shoot at the same time. Even Resident Evil 5 doesn't have this feature. All 8 original characters returned. Each gained an added item or movement ability, but played largely the same role as before. Returning thrill seekers could copy over their save data from the first Outbreak and take in 6 new campaigns. Scenario 1 was a return to Jay's bar for a quick refresher course in chatting and shooting. Scenario 2 scaled the gates of the Raccoon City Zoo for some big game hunting. 3 went underground across flea-infested subway tracks. 4 spawned an axe murderer in hot pursuit and another overgrown plant. 5 was the swan song of Marvin Branagh, the policeman discovered early in Resident Evil 2 as the last group of RPD officers hit the road. And finally 6 was one last jaunt past Umbrella's defenses, into a facility housing a bioweapon called Nyx. Beyond that, Capcom added the unlockable modes Nightmare and Infinity. File 2 managed half the sales numbers of the first Outbreak, and Capcom shut down servers for both games on December 31, 2007. In that time, however, thousands of willing rats stuck in a maze learned what an apocalyptic trip to safety would really take, and multiple difficulty settings ranged things from hellish to downright impossible. The only way to save was to quit the game, and when that save was reloaded, it was erased. So when you died, so did your dreams of finishing that scenario. In online mode, if a team member succumbed to the virus, they could return as one of the undead. Seeing your partner expire and rise as an animated cadaver was a unique experience, one that some survivors will never forget. In Episode 5 of our retrospective, Mikami makes a comeback, and so does Resident Evil. The series hits the silver screen to become a household name, and the man that built the mansion makes the game he'll be remembered for.